So our final awardee, I'm very excited to talk about this person. He is a leading voice in American politics and one of our community's brightest political stars. He recently completed 2 terms as the 41st mayor of Los Angeles and was the first Latino mayor of America's most Latino city in over 140 years. A third-generation American on his mother's side, his grandfather immigrated from Mexico early in the 20th century. Antonio grew up in City Terrace, one of the neighborhoods making up the unincorporated area of East Los Angeles. Now, at age 15, he left his job at a Safeway grocery store to join a picket line supporting the United Farm Workers, who were leading a boycott against the growers of table grapes in California. After graduating from UCLA, he won his reputation as a gifted leader and advocate in labor, becoming president for the Los Angeles chapters of the AFGE and the ACLU. His public service career began with an appointment to the LA Metropolitan Transit Authority, and in 1994, he was elected to the California State Assembly, where he served as Majority Leader and Speaker of the California Assembly. In 2003, he won the 14th District Los Angeles City Council seat, and in 2005, he was sworn in as the mayor of Los Angeles. Now, during his tenure as mayor, he worked tirelessly to reform public education in the worst-performing schools and increase graduation rates, helping to revitalize the city of Los Angeles' downtown area. And in recognition of his lifelong advocacy, public service, and leadership, and for his achievements that we believe are yet to come, LULAC is pleased to present its National Public Service Award to our leader, Mayor Antonio Villarraigosa.
Buenas noches. No, come on. Buenas noches. All right, wake up. First of all, let me acknowledge our 2 honorees tonight. I think we were all listening with rapt attention as Dr. Garcia, our first honoree tonight, talked about her journey. A journey very much like so many of ours here in the room. And I want to acknowledge you for being one of the trailblazers. Every one of us are here on the shoulders of others. And I can tell you that I'm here on your shoulders. Let's give her a big hand. Dr. Garcia. And wherever Assembly Member Alejo, I gave him a big abrazo over here and I said, I love your passion. I love your passion and your accomplishments because we honor those accomplishments. Whether it's a minimum wage bill in a state where there are too many people working hard every single day and can't make it, or the driver's license bill that my friend Gilbert Cedillo and I first got through the legislature in 1998. Thank you for your leadership, your passion, your persistence, and your doggedness on behalf of justice, on behalf of the struggle for equality. Give them a big hand. I actually didn't want to put my remarks here, so from time to time I'll be here, and then I'll walk from one side of the stage to another. I want to thank LULAC. I mentioned here that we're all here on the shoulders of others, that none of us got here just because we're smart or we're educated. We got here because there were civil rights organizations, LULAC for 86 years, the GI Forum, because there was an SCLC, because there was a SNCC, because there were organizations that fought for the notion that to make this great country a more perfect union, to make it all that it held itself out to be when our founding fathers from Europe, didn't include African slaves at the time, and we were invisible. When they decided that they were going to do something different. And it took a few hundred years for us to realize that equality and liberty for all that they talked about. And so every one of us are here to acknowledge and thank those pioneers, those trailblazers at LULAC. I know that wherever I go, whatever I do, I always thank my mom because my mom was my inspiration. But I always thank those people in the civil rights movement, those people who opened up the door for every one of us. You know, it was mentioned that I was working at Safeway at 15. I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I had never worked in the fields. I grew up in a third generation on my mother's side because my father wasn't around, in a home where we spoke English. My experience was not a Mexican experience in that regard. And yet at 15, I knew that I had a responsibility, like so many of you do. I knew that I had to speak up for people who put the food on our table. And in that regard, let's thank the servers who are here today, please, wherever they are. Muchas gracias. Thank you to all of you. I grew up in a home where you have to serve yourself. And so whenever someone serves you, you have to say thank you. And so thank you very much for serving us tonight. So I knew that I had a responsibility like so many of you. There are people from our generation, Dr. Garcia, that remember. In fact, when you mentioned Brownsville, I told you I was with Antonio Orendain and the Texas farm workers in the early 1970s. I was in Delano early on as a young boy. Again, never really having that connection except understanding that we had that responsibility. You mentioned in my introduction, and I want to thank our host today, our moderator here, thank you for introducing us, that I got here as one of the first. It was only the second speaker in modern history of Mexican descent, the first of Mexican descent in 133 years. And there was a lot of ado about that. And early on I said, you know, el papel del primero no es golpear tu pecho y decir que soy tan único, que soy especial. The role of the first is not to say how unique and special I am. The role of the first is to open up the door for the rest. El papel del primero es asegurar que los demás pueden pasar por esa misma puerta de oportunidad. And in that vein, I want to talk to you a little bit about why public service in these times for our community is so important. You know, early on, I grew up in a family where we had health care. My mother worked, a single mom, worked as a secretary. We did have health care, but we didn't have dental care. And there were so many of our neighbors that didn't even have health care. And so early on, I fought for the notion that every kid in California ought to have health care. And by the time I left the legislature, 850,000 kids had health care, the Healthy Families program that I authored. I did that because I understood. We authored the largest school bond in U.S. history and focused it on urban schools where so many of our kids were. We did that, again, because we understood that obligation. You heard Luis Alejo talk about the legislation that he's focused on. Today I'm involved in an effort around home ownership and building small businesses, around health and nutrition and making sure that our people understand the importance of diabetes and what overweight and obesity can do to your health. But as I said, I want to talk about something else today. I want to talk about an issue that I think is the most important issue facing the nation. It is, without question, the economic issue of our time. I was talking to Latino business leaders earlier today, and I mentioned to them, how many of you hear from your businesses and are told, we have people that graduate from our community and they can't even fill out a job application. They don't have a high school diploma. I said, how many unions have come to me and said, Antonio, we want to do more for apprenticeship programs in the Latino community, but they haven't taken algebra. They haven't taken geometry. They can't go through our apprenticeship programs. 25% of the kindergartners in America today are Latino. More than 50% are kids of color. Too many of them aren't graduating from high school. They're not going to college. Yes, it's true. More and more Latinos and African Americans are going to college than ever before. But the number is infinitesimal when compared to our population and when compared to the demographic reality that we're the future of America. That these kids, if they don't get a high school education, if they don't go on to college, if they don't have the skills that they need to succeed, they won't make it. But in addition to being the economic issue of our time, it's the democracy issue of our time. Too few of the voters in our community vote in the numbers that they should. Too few of them vote in no small part because many of them don't feel they have a stake. They don't have an education. They oftentimes are renters versus homeowners. And disproportionately, we know that they don't vote in the numbers that we need them to. Y siempre digo a la gente, tenemos que votar, porque si no votamos, nadie nos va a escuchar ni respetar. So we need an enlightened democracy. It's the civil rights issue of our time. Let's be clear. When you see the achievement gap and where it is today, and you see how few of our kids are going on to graduate and going on to college, you have to be concerned about this growing inequality in America. Not just income inequality, but equality of opportunity. You talked about, Dr. Garcia, about how in one generation in this great country, you were able to go from where your family was before you to where you are and your kids are today. And that happens still on a scale and a scope that we should all be proud of. But the fact of the matter is not happening as much as it used to. The fact of the matter on the Quality of Opportunity Index today, we're not number 1, we're not number 5, we're not number 10, we're number 16, and going in the wrong direction. When it talks about education and where are we across the globe, we're 26. And that's talking about the kids in the middle class and the upper middle class. So when you look at this issue, the civil rights issue of our time, the economic issue of our time, the democracy issue of our time, the question we have to all ask ourselves, what are we doing about it? What are we doing about the fact that we have opened up the doors because of great organizations like LULAC, the GI Forum, and the other organizations I mentioned? What are we doing about the fact that the next generation, disproportionately, too many of them in prison? You know, the issue of criminal justice and responsible policing has been an issue at the forefront of our country, whether it's Ferguson or New York or places around the nation. Make no mistake, this issue is connected to the fact that we're not graduating our folks, to the fact that too many poor people of color aren't going to college and making it in the way that they should. If I told you that today in America, this great, beautiful country of ours, that we incarcerate more people per capita and more people in absolute numbers than any nation in the world, you'd say, that's not true. Well, actually, it is true. And disproportionately, they're black and they're brown. So if we want to deal with criminal justice issues, we got to educate people. We got to give them hope. We got to give them the skills that they need. And so over the course of the last really 25 years in public, well, actually 40 some odd years in public life or public service. But particularly during my time as mayor, I started to take this issue on. And I think you need to take this issue on. You see, in my city, 40% of our kids were graduating. 40%. When I left, it was 70. I don't talk about that a whole lot. You know why? Because 70 is not something to brag home to your mother about. We should have had 100. We should have 100. Every one of our kids ought to be college ready, ought to have the skills that they need to compete in the world. I've often said that this issue has to be your issue. Whenever I'm in a room of a lot of people, I ask, when's the last time you've been in a school for somebody else's child? We all go for our own, for our grandchildren, for our children. When's the last time you went into a school for somebody else's child? I would submit to you that right now, in these times, in these days, this is the most important issue that LULAC and every civil rights organization needs to take on. If we don't equip our kids with the education and the skills that they need to be successful, they won't be able to enjoy the opportunity in America that's been so good to the rest of us. We've got to challenge our public schools and our stakeholders. When I look at the 22 schools I took over, the worst schools in LA, the lowest performing schools in Watts, the most violent schools in the city. If we were a school district, they'd be the most improved over the last 7 years. What do? We got parents involved. We developed a parent college. We said to our parents, you have rights, roles, and responsibilities. We said every one of us can't just say it's the school's responsibility. It's our responsibility. But we also made our teachers in our schools available to these parents. We welcomed them after school and on Saturdays. We focused on rights, roles, and responsibilities. We set the highest standard. You know, they didn't talk about the failings in my life. Politics, I've read a lot about those failings. One of them was that I was a high school dropout. I was kicked out of school before that. I got in trouble. I was a guy who put on a couple of tattoos at 15 and 16, gotten, lost, on the wrong path. And I remember one night coming home, and my mother seen me bloodied and battered and fearful that something had happened, and I was okay. And that morning she saw another bandage on my arm, and she said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's a tattoo." And she said to me, "You don't believe in you, but I believe in you. You are destined for greatness, and you don't even know it." Now, I laughed her off, and I pretty much forgot it until a few years down the line. We got to set the highest expectations for our kids. Too many people in our public schools are saying, "You know what, Antonio, you don't understand. The reason why we have a 40% graduation rate is these kids are English language learners. These kids are foster kids. They're homeless. They're poor." I said, "You're talking about me on some levels. They grew up in battered homes. They grew up without a father. You're talking about so many of us. We can read and write." And so the responsibility of people like us in these times right now is to say to our kids, do you believe in you? When I walk into my schools in Watts, downtown or on the east side, hardcore gang kids got to stand up in the auditorium, and I look at them and I say, do you believe in you? And they got to respond, I believe in me. We've got to set the highest expectations for our kids. We can't keep on making excuses for the lack of success. We got to demand accountability from our legislators, our Congress people, our people at the highest levels of government. We've got to say to ourselves that we've got to be mentors if our own kids are doing well and somebody else's isn't. We've got to be willing to pay more, but to expect more from our schools. We've got to say to everyone, this crisis is too important. This challenge is the nation's challenge. You know, Dr. Garcia, you said it so well. This isn't about being nice to Latino and African American kids because you feel sorry for them, because you're for human rights and for civil rights. This is about the future of the nation if we're going to be the future of the nation. This is our collective responsibility. And so I want to thank LULAC again. You know, I said it at the convention. Rosita, I said, I'm here today because there was a Civil Rights Act. I'm here today because there was a Voting Rights Act. I'm here today because there are organizations like LULAC that have opened up the door for us. If that's true for me, that's true for you too. I love to come to events like this and say, every one of us have a responsibility. Jesse Jackson used to say, not all of us can do everything, but every one of us can do something to make the world a little better. So we need to get behind LULAC. We need to get behind our civil rights organizations. We need to stand up for the notion that parents have a right to be involved, have rights, roles, and responsibilities. We got to say kids first. We got to try new things. We got to set the highest standards. We got to say to our kids, I believe in you. You can fly to the moon, you can reach for the stars, and you can follow your dreams. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.